Hello YouTube and welcome to another episode of Traps Tuesday Tuts. And today we're talking about rails. Why? Because I came up with a rail system that allows you to do something pretty cool. Alright, let's take a look at it. So, what we got here is we go ahead and hop in our rail system and then we scoot along here. And what we just heard was the system activate. Now, if I was in survival, I would have taken a small amount of damage, but nothing that would have actually caused a problem. And that's pretty cool, because what actually we got right here is we got a rail system that goes along this way and all the way out here. But as you note, we didn't actually do that, because what happened to us is this system opened up right here, and that allowed us to drop down here. And then we rolled right on through, and that's where we take damage, because it only goes down 2. So we do intersect with this block temporarily. I haven't yet figured out the redstone to move that block out of the way, which is possible. I just haven't taken the time to do that. I think we could pull it downwards and then pull it back, kind of like a opening door, like a flush door. But I haven't yet figured out that circuiting next to all this other circuiting. So this particular model does give you a little bit of damage, but not much. And it allows you to go in a completely different direction from where you were originally headed, which I think is pretty cool. Now, if one thing I didn't do in this system is I didn't turn on an on-off switch for that. Basically, all you would need to do is take your base input here, which comes from this rail right here. Send that to an AND gate. So it'd be kind of like an AND gate right here, where you would be able to flick the switch, which would make it so that when you hit the activator rail, it would activate the circuit instead of just always working. However, I didn't throw that in here, but we could right in here. It's butted up against this particular build, so I don't want to do that right now because it would just take a little too much space. But that is all that would take, and you would be able to turn it on and off. So you could go normally just straight from here all the way to the other station over there, and just back and forth until you decided you wanted to go. Then you'd flick your switch, it would activate it and allow you to go into the secret rail. So let's start looking at the build. So first thing first, we have an activator rail right here. Now that activator rail goes ahead and runs this redstone down and takes us to one of our redstone T flip-flops here. Completely pistonless again, just like the build we did for the doorway here. I used the exact same system, so you'll recognize it right here. We just did the same thing right here. So again, what this does is this gets locked on or off based on a button push. So that is all it takes. This button is actually here as a reset, obviously, because technically the rail does all the work. But in this particular system, I do have a reset just in case. For instance, I placed that down and that was open, and the only way to get it to close back up is to do that. So that is that system right there. So then the next thing that we have is we have a double piston vertical extender that is tileable. I actually got this particular design from Redstone Magician on Planet Minecraft. And basically all it is, we take a block here, we build up a block here, we build up a block here. These two are not needed. We put a torch on top. A redstone repeater set to the maximum. We put a block on top of this with a redstone torch. We put a comparator facing in. We put a dropper facing upwards and a hopper facing into it. We place a single item, doesn't need to be a redstone torch, but any single item into that system. We go out 2 blocks. This one being the one that's going to get pushed up, and we come up to sticky pistons. Now all that's left is we need to power this block here, and that will double extend, and then it will retract. Now how that works, for anyone that doesn't know, when this gets powered on, this piston gets powered by this block here, which extends it. And then this block gets powered by this redstone torch that gets turned on because this one is now off. And that powers this piston, which extends it. Now the retraction is a little bit different. As we turn this on, the first thing that happens is this turns back on. So what that does is it turns off this torch, which unpowers this, which will then basically what that does is I just replace the torch with this switch so we can see it will retract that. Now the very next thing that's going to happen is this is going to finally hit its unpowered state. So it's going to pull that back. Now what we need to do is fire this again with a quick pulse so that it extends and retracts that back. So what happens is this dropper gets fired, which puts it in an item in the hopper, activating the comparator, which then gets dropped back in, unactivating the comparator. So that sends a quick signal straight through here, activating that and making it extend and retract the last block. So that works. So now what you can do is you can actually build as many of these as you want right next to each other. Alright, so that's 6 of them right next to each other, and what we're going to see here is I can fire any of these individually, and any of them can fire without interacting with the ones next to it, which is actually really kind of cool, because you could build a system that does anything you want with a bunch of these next to each other. Could be useful in a lot of different ways. However, what I wanted to do for my setup is not that. I wanted them all to fire at once. So what I needed to do for my particular setup was then just run a redstone signal out the back here and do some repeaters in. The repeaters, of course, because redstone signal next to itself won't connect to the block next to it. And then I could power that in any way, and all 6 of them are going to fire at once and retract at once. So that does that. So the next thing we had to do was we had to, before this fires at all, we needed to retract these rails so that they didn't get broken. And then the retraction will happen downwards. If I didn't retract these rails, when it retracted down, they wouldn't travel with it, but rather just break into dropped items. So you would just end up with blocks up there, which obviously is not the ideal. I can actually demonstrate that right here. These are activator rails, but all rails work the same as it goes to this. So what we'll see is they don't travel well for whatever reason. So they just break apart. So we had to retract them, and don't forget also that when they retract, they have to be on a block. You can't retract them onto nothing either. So as you can see here, if I stick a couple rails down here, and I have pistons facing in, if I extend this piston, that rail travels just fine. It gets pulled back. However, if I extend that, it breaks right off, and it works in both directions. I'll pull it back this time, and it breaks right off. But if I put that down, it can extend just fine, and it'll retract just fine. So you have to have land underneath the rail, or it will break, and it has to be at least a level block. A half slab on the upper half is fine, but it has to be a block that can have a rail placed on it there for it to sit on. So that retracts that back. Now how that does that at the right time is it needs to, on the retraction, as this goes down, it needs to pull that back the very first thing. But it needs to put the rail out last so that it again, those blocks have to get pushed back up into place fully before it pushes them back out. So it has to retract first and extend last. And similarly, down here, we have these 2 rails that end up on top of the retracted blocks. those need to extend last and retract first on the opposite direction. So when it's closing, they need to retract right away before the pistons push up the blocks back into place, and then it needs to fire last after the blocks have fully been retracted, because if it pushes them out beforehand, it's actually just going to break the system, because it's going to push them into these pistons, and that's just going to be bad. So how we do that is we have these two systems set up here, and what they are is just redstone signal going in. So this uses torches to power these two, with repeaters powering the blocks to turn them off. This torch tower right here gets the power up here. There's another repeater right here, and that takes care of all of that. But the timing of the last on, first off, and the inverse of that is handled completely by these blocks here. This gets powered again from our toggle switch straight in right here. So then this repeater line is going to make this turn get unpowered last, but this allows it to power first, because this just has one tick delay. So it only takes one tick for that to get powered and turn off that torch. However, when we turn off this circuit, it takes all of these ticks for this to turn back on, because all of these have to let the signal flow through and turn off before this can turn back on. And we can go ahead and watch that by clicking this button here. And then this set over here does the opposite of it. So basically, when this flip-flop here is unpowered, this is powered by this inverter right here. But this one is unpowered when the flip-flop is unpowered, and vice versa. So it does the exact same thing, but in the opposite direction, because obviously this set of rails needs to work in the opposite way of that set of rails. So that's why that happens that way. And we can see, we can pay attention to that side now. And then this is the torch tower that goes up, and this just actually goes straight to these repeaters here. Now the timing had to be worked out. I had to do a little bit of experimentation to make sure that everything would happen in the right timing. Because obviously if these blocks retracted before these fired, or before these got pulled back, that would be a problem, and so forth and so on. So, if anyone actually wants to build this exact build, and if you do, I would recommend actually doing a third rail right here of retraction, because like I said, that can be tileable, at least as far as redstone can go, and then actually you could do a little bit of redstone extension and make it go even further. So, I would recommend doing 3, but however you want to do it is perfectly fine. But if you are interested in building this, what I would do is there's no pulse extension here. This has a pulse extension of 3, and the ones that power this double extender here actually have a pulse extension of 4 ticks. And then these, of course, are part of the system over there, so those are 4 ticks because they have to be to make the extension work. These have 0 ticks, but there is this one here that adds an extra tick because that is needed. Technically, these could probably be set to 2 ticks, and this wouldn't be needed, but this is what I did. In fact, you know what? I'm kind of curious. Let's try it out. If I extend this to 2, does that make the system still activate properly? So right now, all the rails are intact. And let's fire it again. Those rails are intact, and those rails are intact. So yeah, that works just there. So 2 ticks of delay, one way or another, is what this needs here from this torch, which is a 2-torch tower, which is important because each torch adds a little bit of delay as well. This is on 1 tick, just natural state. However, each of these 4 repeaters here are on 4 ticks. And of course, all of this redstone could be routed in a different direction. This is just the way it happened to work out in this world this time. So on the top ones that need to do very first and very last, there is 1 tick delay here. There's a 3 torch tower. And then 1 tick of delay here and here, with 4 ticks of delay here and here. Which also gets 1 repeater here, which adds 1 tick there. And then this torch for the inversion here. Finally, we have the last thing I haven't yet talked about is the extra activator rail at the end here. And all that does is it sends a signal, and I made this go under just for ease of wiring. There's lots of different options as to how this could have gone, but under worked well for this setup. There's a repeater here that is just to extend the signal because the distance is too far for the redstone and we needed to extend it. And then that comes back up into the same block. So this is again our pistonless T flip-flop here that gets powered from both activator rails. And that, of course, could have joined this line somewhere or whatever. This whole system could have gone around. Now, do note, I actually had to move this. Originally, I just had this here. But this was not enough distance, and I can actually demonstrate that. So you have to make sure that you're on the rail long enough from the first detector rail for this entire sequence to complete, because otherwise what's going to end up happening is something much like this. I hit this rail before this actually got extended. And so what that ended up doing was I got stuck on those because they were unpowered. As I got out, you saw I accidentally pushed the rail cart and it hit the other activator rail. But yeah, so I was stuck there, unable to move because of that. And we can see that again right here. Obviously, that was closing, but what you saw was it had not finished by the time I got to here, so I had no momentum and was stuck. So, again, just make sure you have enough distance here for the system to work. This may have actually been a little bit excessive because it almost worked as was, but I just wanted to be sure, so I just went a little bit extra far just in case. So that is what I've come up with. Obviously, you would not use iron blocks. You would kind of make this more a natural environment. Unfortunately, to not break these rails. Now, of course, if this is going to be used as a trap, you could go ahead and build this exact system without these here, because you don't mind if these rails get broken if it's a trap and killing someone. But if this is a secret entrance to a place, you're gonna need these to be exposed here, unless you, again, just like the thing here, these in theory could be designed with a 1-tick pulse to pop these out, and then they could go back and get hidden, and a whole system could be put up here. I haven't worked on figuring all of that out either. I may do that in the future, but for right now, these are necessary to be exposed here for the time being. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little look at some rail systems and some things you can do. Remember to keep on building, and of course, always remember, don't get trapped without me.